Okay, so today we're diving into something that's going to be a little different.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about the Church of Satan.
Mm-hmm.
I know the name itself.
Right.
It can conjure up
We have to load it.
all sorts of images.
Yeah.
Right. But you're not here for like the spooky music version of this.
Yeah.
You're here to understand
Right.
what they're really about.
Yeah, exactly.
And what
Yeah.
better way to do that than go straight to the source,
Absolutely.
their website. No
Yeah.
filters, no interpretations, just their own words.
Yeah. Just the text as it's presented.
Ready to be surprised.
I think you might be, especially if you've only sort of encountered this through the media.
Right, or like a passing
Right.
reference or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
So first impression, this isn't some fly-by-night group. They were founded in 1966.
Yeah.
That's like,
That predates
wait,
a lot of the modern satanic panic stuff. Like, this is before that.
Yeah.
That really took hold.
interesting.
So it's really crucial to kind of have that context, right?
Yeah.
The Church of Satan is emerging from a very specific cultural moment. And, you can see the influence of Anton LaVey,
Their founder.
their founder on the ideas.
Now, when you say influenced, what we're really talking about is LaVey's writings.
Yeah.
Right? He's the one who kind of lays out
Yeah.
the philosophy.
Yeah. I mean, religion is kind of a loaded term, I think.
Right.
But in terms of like the philosophy, yes, absolutely. LaVey's writing is really key here. And one of the most striking things that you see in his work is this idea that the Satanist is their own god, in a sense.
Okay, now that's where things get really, really interesting.
Yeah.
Because if you're saying, I am my own God, what does that even mean? Like, how do you live that?
It's a great question, and it's something that they grapple with
Okay.
throughout their writings. It really comes down to this emphasis on individual autonomy.
Okay.
It's about rejecting external authority.
Okay.
Whether that's a deity, a government, or even just like societal norms.
Interesting.
Right. So you are responsible for your own destiny. You are responsible for your own moral code.
So it's less about worshiping a literal
Right.
devil with horns and a pitchfork,
Right.
and more about this embracing personal responsibility.
Precisely.
Yeah, it's about recognizing the power and the burden of self-determination.
Yeah. You make your own choices, you deal with the consequences, and you don't get to blame some external force for your circumstances.
I see.
There's a very, empowering, but also potentially scary kind of philosophy.
Which makes the name the Church of Satan even more intriguing.
Right.
Because you're saying it's not about devil worship.
Right.
So why go with something so intentionally provocative?
Right. And that's a question that sparked a lot of debate. And to be honest, there's no single easy answer.
Yeah.
But I think one way to think about it is that it forces a confrontation.
Okay.
You can't encounter a name like that and not have some kind of reaction.
Right.
And maybe that reaction, that discomfort even, is part of the point.
It gets people thinking,
Yeah.
questioning their own assumptions about good and evil, about religion, about personal freedom.
Absolutely. You're on the right track. It's about challenging the status quo. It's about pushing people to examine their own beliefs rather than just blindly accepting what they've been told.
And that's something we're going to see throughout a lot of their writings.
Yes, absolutely. As we'll see when we dig into some of their core tenets, this idea of questioning, of challenging, of really thinking for yourself is central to their philosophy.
Okay, so we've talked about the philosophy, this idea of self-deification,
Right.
radical personal responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
But what I find really interesting is they don't just leave it there
Right.
as some sort of like abstract concept.
Right.
They actually have structure,
They have an organization.
an organization. It's
Yeah.
true, like a whole...
It can seem a little counterintuitive.
Right, because it's like,
Because you have this philosophy.
be your own God,
Right.
but also join our club. We have meetings.
Right. Exactly.
Right, like I'm not mocking it,
Yeah.
but I just find that contrast really interesting.
It is interesting. And it's something that I think, we need to kind of grapple with as we look at this. And I think it speaks to the fact that, humans are social creatures.
Yeah.
Even the ones who buck against convention.
Yeah.
Right? So the grotto system, for example.
Their system of like local gatherings.
Yeah, local gatherings allows for that. It allows for finding like-minded individuals, for engaging in discourse,
Right.
for building community around shared values.
It's almost like a philosophical society.
Yes.
Or even a fraternal order,
Yeah.
but with a very specific
Right.
and, let's be honest, edgy worldview.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's a great comparison.
Okay.
Because it highlights that even within a group that celebrates individuality, there's still this desire for shared experience.
Okay.
For ritual.
Right.
For belonging.
So let's talk about those rituals, or at least the guidelines that shape them.
Okay.
They have the 9 satanic statements.
Yes.
The 11 satanic rules of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Are these like their version of commandments?
It's tempting to see them that way, but I think it's more accurate to call them guiding principles.
Okay.
They're not meant to be followed blindly, but rather to encourage critical thinking to spark introspection.
Okay, let's dive into some specifics.
Okay.
Because I think there are some real eye-openers in here.
Yeah.
For example, one of the rules of the earth is all about respecting the strong.
Right.
Not exactly the image that pops into my head when I think Church of Satan.
Right. It goes against the stereotype of Satanists as these, like, chaos-loving rebels without a cause.
Right. Yeah.
But respecting strength, in their view, is about acknowledging competence.
Okay.
Whether that's in yourself or in others.
Interesting.
And it ties back to their emphasis on self-responsibility.
Okay.
You strive for excellence, you admire it in others, and you don't make excuses for weakness.
So you're saying, like, you should admire people who are good at what they do.
Yeah, strive to be good at what you do.
Okay.
And sort of, own your own shortcomings.
And
don't blame others for your own failings.
So it's kind of like a very, like, what's the word?
It's a very...
almost like a self-reliance.
Yeah, self-reliant. Yeah, and a sort of...
rugged individualism.
Yeah, there's a certain element of that for sure.
Which, again,
yeah,
when you think about it with the name Church of Satan,
yeah,
you don't necessarily...
Right, it's not the first thing that comes to mind.
Right, it's very unexpected.
Yeah.
But when you actually start to look at the content, it makes a weird kind of sense.
It does, and I think that's one of the things that's so fascinating about digging into these primary source documents, right?
Yeah.
Is that it challenges our assumptions. It forces us to kind of confront our preconceived notions and actually engage with the material on its own terms.
Yeah, not the terms that the media or
society
has, kind of.
Exactly. We often encounter these ideas through a very distorted lens.
Right.
And so to actually go back to the source material.
So the horse's mouth, so to speak.
Exactly. It can be really eye-opening.
Okay, so we're seeing this idea of self-responsibility kind of popping up again and again.
Absolutely. It's a recurring theme for sure.
But they also have, and this is another one of those things that I found really interesting when I was looking through the website, they have a rule about not harming little children.
Right.
Which, again...
It's not what you would expect.
Not what you would expect.
Right. And it's actually, I think, one of the most frequently misunderstood aspects of their philosophy because it seems to contradict the image of Satanists as being these, like, evil, wicked people.
Baby eaters,
Right, exactly. But when you actually look at it in the context of their core tenets, it makes perfect sense.
Okay, connect the dots for me.
Well, if you believe in self-determination and personal responsibility, then harming a child is like the ultimate violation.
Because they don't have that.
Exactly. They haven't yet developed their own sense of self. To harm them would be to contradict the very idea of individual empowerment that's so central to their belief system.
Right, because you're taking away their agency before they even really have a chance to develop it.
Exactly. You're denying them the opportunity to become their own gods, in a sense.
Interesting. So it's almost like, I don't know if hypocritical is the right word, but it's this weird juxtaposition of, like, this very individualistic philosophy, but then also this recognition of the vulnerability of people who aren't able to...
Who haven't yet reached that point of self-actualization.
Okay, so I kind of get that, but you would think from, like, a PR standpoint, maybe they wouldn't be so upfront about that because it's...
It can be easily misinterpreted.
Right.
And it's often used against them.
You'd think they'd just be like, be nice to kids.
Right. Exactly. But I think it speaks to their commitment to not sugarcoating their message.
Interesting.
They're not interested in making themselves more palatable to the mainstream. They're challenging people to confront these ideas head on.
And they're not shying away from the controversy at all.
No, they're leaning into it.
Yeah.
And to their credit, they're very proactive about addressing misinformation.
You're talking about that Apocrypha debunked section on their website where they, like, go point by point.
They debunk all the crazy rumors, all the myths, all the misconceptions.
It's like, here's what people say about us, and here's what we actually believe.
Exactly. It's a really interesting tactic, I think.
It's very transparent.
Yeah, it's like they're saying, Don't take our word for it. Read our words, engage with our ideas directly.
Which is kind of refreshing in a way,
It is, in a way.
in a world of like spin and PR.
Absolutely.
Just be like, here's what we believe, come at us.
Judge for yourself.
Yeah.
Based on the actual evidence.
So speaking of things that are maybe unexpected, when you think about the Church of Satan,
Yeah.
let's talk about their stance on drugs.
Oh.
So drugs.
Yeah.
What's the Church of Satan's stance on drugs?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? You might assume...
Party all the time.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Right.
But it's actually more nuanced than that. They're not advocating for, like, some kind of hedonistic free-for-all.
Okay.
It really goes back to that idea of self-control.
Right, which we talked about.
Exactly.
With a few other things, too.
It's about being mindful, making conscious choices about what you put into your body. It's your choice, right?
Okay.
You're free to indulge, but you're also responsible for what happens afterward.
So it's like a very nuanced view of indulgence.
It is, yeah. It's not just say no.
Right.
But it's also not go crazy. It's about finding that balance.
Interesting. Okay, last kind of curveball I want to throw out there, their stance on politics.
Yeah, this is another one that often surprises people.
Because again, you would think that they would be.
Right. With a name like the Church of Satan, you'd expect them to be like super edgy and...
Anti-establishment.
Right, anti-government, maybe even anarchistic.
Yeah.
But they're actually remarkably neutral when it comes to politics.
Interesting. So how does that work?
Well, they see it as a form of external authority.
Right, which they're not about.
Exactly. Just like they don't want to tell you what God to worship, they don't want to tell you who to vote for either.
So they're kind of saying, like, figure it out for yourselves.
Yes. Exactly. Think critically, do your own research, and come to your own conclusions.
Interesting.
It's about empowering the individual to be politically engaged, but on their own terms.
Which kind of brings us back to that theme of self-reliance.
Absolutely.
And personal responsibility that we keep seeing.
It's really at the core of their philosophy, even when it comes to something like politics.
So if we're trying to tie all this together, what are we left with?
Yeah.
We've got this group, the Church of Satan.
Mm-hmm.
Immediately you think you know what it's all about, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you actually dive into the source material,
It gets a lot more complicated.
right, they're not devil worshippers. They're not out to, like, destroy society.
They're not about chaos.
Right. In a lot of ways, it seems like they actually value things like self-control, responsibility,
Critical thinking, yeah.
which is not what you expect.
It's definitely a challenge to our preconceived notions.
Right. And maybe that's the point.
I think you might be onto something. It's like they're forcing us to question our assumptions, to look beyond the surface.
And to engage with their ideas on their own terms, not just through the lens of stereotypes and media hype.
Exactly. And to me, that's a really valuable exercise, regardless of where you stand on their actual beliefs.
Because at the end of the day, whether you agree with them or not,
It makes you think.
right, it makes you think.
It makes you question.
And maybe that's enough.
Maybe that's a good start.
Well, on that note, as always, we encourage you to check out the source material for yourselves.
Yeah, don't take our word for it.
Read it, think about it, and let us know what you think.